Ezekiel 27, we left off 2 weeks ago at kind of an awkward point because we're we're 2 chapters into our third main section of Ezekiel. There's Ezekiel's call, and that's most of the first 3 chapters. And then we get into this long section where God pronounces judgment after judgment after judgment against his people, against Judah. Now we're a couple chapters into the third big chunk where God is speaking judgment against the Gentile nations. And this is going to take us through chapter 32. But the section that we began a little while ago, after sort of a frantic open in chapter 25, where God pronounces judgment against Ammon and Moab and Edom, and Philistia, then the Holy Spirit then settles into pronouncing judgment against Tyre. And it's a change of pace. It's not a change of direction, but it's a change of pace, because after 4 nations in 1 chapter, now we have 1 nation that God elaborates, he expands upon his judgment, his justice, his wrath against them, and he goes on for 3 chapters, which tells us it's probably significant. We took a week off after the first chapter, after chapter 26, which wasn't ideal, I realize, but it is what it is, and we are where we are, and we'll get caught up. Chapter 26, just by way of review, because we've all slept since then. In my study Bible, the header is proclamation against Tyre, similar to what we read as God embarked on his judgment against other nations. Tyre, we said a couple weeks ago, an ancient city, arguably the most ancient in the region, leading city of the Phoenician people, located in what we would call Lebanon today, is going to be attacked by Nebuchadnezzar. History says it was attacked by Nebuchadnezzar, more or less at the same time that Nebuchadnezzar laid siege to Jerusalem. But in the case of Tyre, he laid siege for 13 years. At least partially in fulfillment of the prophecy that we read 2 weeks ago and that we'll continue reading tonight. I say partially because chapter 26, verse 3 refers to waves of judgment. The first wave was Nebuchadnezzar's army, the assault by the Babylonians, but that was followed by an attack by the Persians in 539, and another attack by Alexander, in which the fortress city, the island city, finally fell in 332 BC. But it turns out that the waves that God refers to in chapter 26, verse 3, extend even beyond that. The Seleucids, the Ptolemies, they get their turn. The Romans have a crack. But as we got deeper into the chapter, as we got deeper into chapter 26 a couple weeks ago, we noticed a compelling parallel. We noticed resonance, we noticed overlap with the language of Revelation 18, where waves of judgment are again crashing against the Gentile nations during the tribulation. And in chapter 18, we see God's judgment poured out against both the city and the economic system referred to in Revelation as Babylon. Wouldn't be a waste of time if you snuck a finger to Revelation 18. We're not going to get there for a while, but we're going to look at it again tonight. We're going to dig into the parallelism again and the dual fulfillment that I think is going on here in Ezekiel 27. But with that by way of refresher or reminder, let's actually read our text tonight. It's captioned in my study Bible, Lamentation for Tyre. So that tells us right off the get, this is another dirge. This is another funeral song. We've seen a few of them already in Ezekiel, and this is another one. Chapter 27, verse 1, the word of the Lord came again to me, saying, now, son of man, take up a lamentation for Tyre. So this is a distinct prophecy. It's probably given at or around the same time as what we read in chapter 26, but the word of the Lord came again to me. This is a separate message, separated if for no other reason than perhaps for emphasis. It's a separate message, and this one, interestingly, begins with praise for Tyre, or with what sounds like praise. Say to Tyre, verse 3, you who are situated at the entrance of the sea, merchant of the people on many coastlands, Thus says the Lord God, O Tyre, you've said, I'm perfect in beauty. Your borders are in the midst of the seas. Your builders have perfected your beauty. This is sort of an introduction. This is God rhetorically asking, what do people think of when they think of Tyre? What do the people of Tyre think of when they think of their city? And God rattles off a few attributes, a few characteristics. You're in a strategic location there on the coast. You're an economic hub. Merchants flock to you and you export to merchants. You're beautiful, verse 3. You're strong. You're in the midst of the sea. That's a way of referring to that island fortress that was the anchor of the city's defense. In every respect, what God is saying here at the beginning, in every respect, Tyre was a testimony to what people can accomplish. It's a monument to human ingenuity. But we sense a but coming, don't we? Not yet. It's going to be a while. But if you feel like it's coming, you're not wrong. Verse 5, the praise continues for a little bit. They made all your planks of fir trees from Shinar. They took a cedar from Lebanon to make you a mast. Of oaks of Bashan they made your oars. The company of Asherites have inlaid your planks with ivory from the coasts of Cyprus. Fine embroidered linen from Egypt was what you spread for your sail. Blue and purple from the coasts of Elisha was what covered you. So we're working a metaphor here. God is introducing what's going to be an extended metaphor. It's going to run on and off throughout the chapter. Not a unique metaphor. You can find many examples in literature referring to or characterizing a people or a place as a ship, and that's what's going on here. The great ship of the city Tyre, the great ship of the commerce centered in and around Tyre. And interestingly, even among secular literature, of examples of ship imagery to characterize a people or a place, this is regarded in secular literature as among the most beautiful. Not surprising considering who the author is. But verses 5 to 7, the Holy Spirit's detailing construction of this merchant ship. And again, in the most favorable, the most praiseworthy terms. Planks from Shinar is Mount Hermon, the highest mountain in the region. Masts from the renowned cedars of Lebanon that were used in the construction of the temple. Oars from the oaks of Bashan, the strongest wood in the region. Deck inlaid with ivory and Egyptian cloth. Go to a fancy resort or hotel. They'll probably brag in their promotional material. Our sheets are Egyptian cotton because it's still renowned in the world today. The coasts, or depending on your translation, I might say the Isles of Elisha, not sure what that is. Different commentators will say, well, it's part of Greece or Italy or Sicily or Cyprus. Wherever it's from, we know that the blue and purple dye is dyeing the fabric with the colors of royalty. So if you take it all together, the picture we get of this great ship Tyre is a picture of elegance. It's a picture of luxury. It's regal, it's wealthy, it's powerful. This is a well-crafted, well-put-together nation. In verse 8, the metaphor continues, but it shifts to the people of Tyre, who are going to be personified as the crew and the builders of this great ship. Inhabitants of Sidon and Arvad were your oarsmen. Your wise men, O Tyre, were in you. They became your pilots. Elders of Gebel and its wise men were in you to caulk your seams. All the ships of the sea and their oarsmen were in you to market your merchandise. So Sidon is a fishing town north of Tyre. They're often mentioned together in Scripture, Tyre and Sidon, right? Arvad is in Syria, or associated with Syria. It's an island. So what do those two places have in common? Well, people from both communities would commonly row. Sidon because they were fishermen, Arvad because they were an island. And so the idea here is when you went to recruit oarsmen, you went to the people who really knew from rowing. You got the best of the best. This may or may not have anything to do with recruiting literal rowers. I think the picture, the idea that God is communicating is that the workers were strong, reliable, dependable, the best available. Wise men were pilots, referencing the king's advisors. They were really smart, sophisticated, well-educated people helping the king steer the ship of state. The king was well counseled by informed, intelligent men. And verse 9, Gabel, another port city, kind of halfway between Sidon and Arvad, that's where they sourced the craftsmen, the caulkers who sealed up the ship, so to speak. And again, I think that this is probably more idiom than factual reality. The idea is that everything was sealed up tight. There weren't any gaps. Every need was filled. Every need was sourced in a way that made Tyre a strong economic power to market their merchandise, to be a commercial powerhouse. But God's not done. Economic powers in the world tend to be short-lived if they aren't reinforced by military power. And so verse 10, God goes into that. Those from Persia, Lydia, Libya were in your army as men of war. They hung shield and helmet in you. They gave splendor to you. Men of Arvad with your army were on your walls all around, and the men of Gamad were in your towers. They hung their shields on your walls all around. They made your beauty perfect. So we're setting aside the metaphor of a ship just for a moment, and the city here in these two verses is actually a city. Persia, at this point, still a rising power, not yet a superpower. They were 50 years away or so from regional domination. Lydia and Libya here, literally Lud and Put, and you can go back to the Table of Nations in Genesis 10 and trace this on a lot of the peoples who are named in subsequent verses. Controversy as to the identity, probably locate both of them in North Africa, and you won't be too far wrong. By the way, in your notes tonight, I stapled a map. I couldn't find a map that was going to work on the screens big enough for it to do any good. Hopefully it comes across for people watching online, and if you want to pop that up for the people on the stream. But as we name different cities and places and peoples, a lot of them are located on the map. There's controversy around a few of these, and I'll try to call that out as we go. It may be that I call out one location and your map has it somewhere else. It's the Biblical Archaeology Society, so their opinion is at least as good as anybody's. But Persia, Lydia, Libya, in context, we know from history, all three of those regions were well known at this point for supplying mercenary fighters to various armies in the region, especially Egypt. So you're bringing in the best army, the best military force that money can buy. Verse 10 doesn't imply that it was just for show. Verse 10 says that they were, the implication is that they were orderly. They presented themselves well. They gave a formidable image to anyone who would think about attacking. Their mere presence was a demonstration of strength and a reminder of the city's power. Internally, they relied on homegrown soldiers supplemented by men from Arvad. And it says in the New King James, the men of Gamad were in your towers. Other translations just say that they were valorous men, brave men. But either way, what we've got is we've got a contingent of troops, contingent of mercenaries outside the city, and then remember the fortress island that was the anchor of Tyre's defense. That had homegrown troops supplemented by Syrian troops. They manned the walls of the city and the towers. Together, things were buttoned up tight. The picture is that this was a secure city, well defended, safe, and therefore prosperous. So verses 10 and 11 drifted, no pun intended, away from the sailing metaphor. Verse 12, back into it. And beginning in verse 12, the sailing voyage of this great merchant vessel, this great economic engine Tyre, is described. Trade with other cities and colonies of the region is listed in fairly great detail. Tarshish was your merchant, verse 12, because of your many luxury goods. They gave you silver, iron, tin, and lead for your goods. Tarshish, we've talked about this in our study through the life of Paul, because Tarshish comes up in Paul's epistles. Spain, maybe, probably, most likely. Wherever Tarshish was, it was a source of tin necessary for making bronze, and there's no silver anywhere near Tyre, so when they needed silver, they needed to import it. Verse 13, Javan, Tubal, Meshach were your traders. They bartered human lives, slaves in other words, and vessels of bronze for your merchandise. Verse 14, those from the house of Togarmah traded for your wares with horses, steeds, and mules. That's probably Armenia or Turkey, somewhere in that region. Verse 15, the men of Dedan were your traders. Many isles were the market of your hand. They brought you ivory tusks and ebony as payment. So they were not only direct traders, but they were also middlemen for other exchange. This is probably the island of Rhodes in the Aegean Sea. A lot of commentators will locate it in Saudi Arabia. I disagree for a reason that we'll get to. Probably the island of Rhodes. Verse 16, Syria, we know Syria was your merchant because of an abundance of goods that you made. They gave you for your wares emeralds, purple, embroidery, fine linen, corals, and rubies. Verse 17, Judah and the land of Israel were your traders. Again, middlemen. They traded for your merchandise wheat of Minnith, millet, honey, oil, and balm. Damascus, which we associate with Syria, but it was its own city, its own power at this point, was your merchant because of the abundance of goods that you made, because of your many luxury items with the wine of Helbon and with white wool. Dan and Javan paid for your wares, traversing back and forth. Wrought iron, cassia, and cane were among your merchandise. Verse 20, Dedan was your merchant in saddlecloths for riding. So this has us saying, because verse 21, we read Arabia, and the place names that follow are all associated with Arabia. So this, verse 20, is probably the Dedan in Arabia, the one previous, I think, the island of Rhodes. Verse 20, Dedan was your merchant in saddlecloths for riding. Arabia and all the princes of Kedar were your regular merchants. They traded with you in lambs, rams, goats. The merchants of Sheba and Raamah were your merchants. They traded for your wares the choicest spices, all kinds of precious stones and gold. Haran, Cana, Eden, the merchants of Sheba, Assyria, Kilmad were your merchants. These were your merchants in choice items, in purple clothes and embroidered garments, and chests of multicolored apparel and sturdy woven cords, which were in your marketplace. Verse 23 and 24, we shifted from Arabia to Mesopotamia. And again, the map there for your reference, but from 30,000 feet, if we get out of the shipping manifest here, 20 different cities or nations, 20 different distinct places trading directly with Tyre, 3 more trading indirectly, like verse 17, Minnith trades with Judah, which trades with Tyre, and a total of 37 different products. Why all of this detail? I think it's to reinforce the depth, the integrity, the strength of Tyre's economic power. Because Business 101, diversity is strength, right? Diversity in product, diversity in market. You don't want to put all of your eggs in one basket, either in what you sell or who you sell to. That makes you vulnerable. So I think that this is this elaboration is a demonstration of just how strong, just how resilient Tyre was, or thought she was. And again, the reminder from earlier that the economic strength was backed by military strength. They had the best army that money could buy. Verse 25, the ships of Tarshish were carriers of your merchandise. You were filled and very glorious in the midst of the sea. Kind of a summary statement, encapsulating everything that we read, verses 12 to 24. Ships of Tarshish were carriers of your merchandise. You were filled and very glorious in the midst of the city. Your oarsmen brought you into many waters. Ships of Tarshish, by the way, here, we're tempted to say, okay, this is parallelism. This is bookending the way the passage began back in verse 12. And it could be. It could be just a parallel reference to the city of Tarshish. Could be a reference to the merchant fleet that was based there. Some commentators suggest that the way it's used in verse 25, though, is describing not a place, but a class or a category. It's a way of saying you were playing with the big boys. You were trading with and alongside all of the best and biggest importers and exporters. You were a major player right alongside anybody. And the trade that you were doing, verse 25, it filled you. It made you full. It made you rich. It made you content. It made you satisfied. It made you mighty. But we've been waiting for it. Here it comes. But, verse 26, the east wind broke you in the midst of the sea, because their trade made them full and rich and mighty and also haughty. The east wind broke you in the midst of the sea. We're back to the picture of a sailing ship. In verse 26, we read the description of a shipwreck. A shipwreck that brings the glory and majesty of this great economic vessel Tyre to a screeching halt. The east wind broke you in the midst of the sea, verse 27. Your riches, wares, merchandise, your mariners and pilots, your caulkers, merchandisers, all your men of war who are in you, and the entire company which is in your midst. Everyone that we talked about at the beginning of the chapter will fall into the midst of the sea on the day of your ruin. Near-term fulfillment, this is almost certainly a reference to Nebuchadnezzar's army. Why? Because Nebuchadnezzar's army would have approached from the east, did approach from the east. We know that Alexander marched on the city from the west. So short term, this is probably a reference to the Babylonian siege, which produced all kinds of economic disruption, affected all of the people in the city and surrounding the city. All of the people and all the various occupations all shared in Tyre's demise, and the impact rippled out from there. Verse 28, the common land will shake at the sound of the cry of your pilots. The surrounding area outside of the siege, a siege would literally surround the city, but if the city's cut off, then the outlying areas, what we would call the suburbs or the exurbs, the neighboring towns, the fact that Tyre was cut off meant that they were cut off from their source of economic stability, their source of buying and selling. So they're going down with the ship as well. And those who don't go down with the ship are going to abandon ship. Verse 29, all who handle the oar, the mariners, all the pilots of the sea, will come down from their ships and stand on the shore. And as they bail out wailing and moaning, because they know that life as they've known it is forever changed. They'll make their voice heard because of you. Verse 30. God is saying, Tyre, you did this to yourself. They'll cry bitterly and cast dust on their heads. They'll roll about in ashes. They'll shave themselves completely bald because of you, gird themselves with sackcloth and weep for you with bitterness of heart and bitter wailing. I don't think that there's an expression of mourning that we find anywhere in the Old Testament that isn't included here. God is exhaustive in his description. Every way that they can express their grief, they're expressing it. And they're wailing for you, verse 32, they'll take up a lamentation and lament for you. What city is like Tyre, destroyed in the middle of the sea? When has this ever happened before? How did this happen? This hasn't happened to anybody else ever. What happened here to Tyre of all cities? This has implications for everyone. There's no one not affected. Verse 33, when your wares went out by sea, when things were good, when you were buying and selling, you satisfied many people. You enriched the kings of the earth with your many luxury goods and your merchandise. You were a truly great economic engine in the region. So great that your downfall is affecting everyone. All the inhabitants of the isles will be astonished at you. Their kings will be greatly afraid, and their countenance will be troubled. But here's the one that makes us say, Verse 36, the merchants among the peoples will hiss at you. You will become a horror and be no more forever. Here's the interesting thing, and it's the same interesting thing that we ended up with in chapter 26 a couple of weeks ago. Verse 36 is unfulfilled prophecy. Why do I say that? Because the city of Tyre exists today. So when God says that Tyre will be no more forever, that hasn't happened yet. And if we back up to verse 26 and following, we get the same sense reading it that we got reading chapter 26. We get a sense of shock. We get a sense of surprise. We get a sense of suddenness. This is a sudden, abrupt calamity. And that doesn't fit what we know of Nebuchadnezzar's advance in 586 to 573 BC. Because when Tyre finally falls, it falls at the end of a 13-year siege. There was nothing sudden or abrupt about it. And even when it fell to Nebuchadnezzar, the fortress island remained strong. Nebuchadnezzar didn't succeed in overtaking the fortress island. Neither did Persia. It didn't fall. It wasn't vanquished until 332 BC when Alexander built a causeway out of the rubble of the rest of the city and walked his troops out and finally took the island. But by that time, Tyre wasn't an economic power anymore, not the way that they had been. So what's going on? Obviously, Tyre was defeated at the hands of Nebuchadnezzar, and then in subsequent waves, like we talked about, Alexander and the Ptolemies and the Seleucids and the Romans. But like most short-term prophecies, what we read here doesn't line up perfectly with history. History only fulfills what we've read here in chapter 27 partially. I said 2 weeks ago, and I said again at the beginning of our time tonight, I think the ultimate, the complete fulfillment of what we're reading is Revelation 18. It's at the end of the tribulation. We looked at it a couple of weeks ago, but let's look at it again, because it's going to resonate even more strongly after what we read tonight. We won't read the whole thing, but let's start at the start. Revelation 18, verse 1. After these things, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority. The earth was illuminated with his glory. And he cried mightily with a loud voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, and has become a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hated bird. So there's a sense of the finality that we read in Ezekiel 27. Verse 3, for all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. This is starting to resonate, right? Skip down to verse 9. The kings of the earth who committed fornication and lived luxuriously with her will weep and lament for her when they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance for fear of her torment, saying, alas, alas, that great city, Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come. A sense of that suddenness that we read in chapter 26 and 27 of Ezekiel. But read what follows. The merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her, verse 11, for no one buys their merchandise anymore. Merchandise of gold and silver, precious stones and pearls, fine linen and purple, silk and scarlet, every kind of citron wood, every object of ivory, every kind of object of most precious wood, bronze, iron, marble, cinnamon, incense, fragrant oil, frankincense, wine and oil, fine flour and wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and chariots, and bodies and souls of men. Slavery. The fruit that you so long for is gone from you, and all the things which are rich and splendid have gone from you, and you shall find them no more at all. Again, the finality. The merchants of these things who become rich by her will stand at a great distance for fear of her torment, weeping and wailing and saying, Alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen, purple, scarlet, adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, for in 1 hour such great riches came to nothing. Every shipmaster, all who traveled by ship, sailors, and as many as trade on the sea, stood at a distance and cried out when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What is like this great city? More resonance, right? They threw dust on their heads and cried out, weeping and wailing, saying, Alas, alas, that great city, in which all who had ships on the sea became rich by her wealth. In 1 hour she's made desolate. Now, why in the world would this city / economic system be referred to as Tyre in the Old Testament and Babylon in Revelation? Why not consistent naming? Tune in next week. But if you want to read ahead, read chapter 28 and ask yourself, chapter 28 talks about the prince of Tyre and it talks about the king of Tyre. Read ahead and ask yourself, are those the same person or two different people? Two different titles for the same guy? Two different guys. And who are they, or who is he? A person? A demon? A demigod? A devil? Tyre is fallen. It's only baseball-sized hail, so it's not tribulation yet. Who is the prince of Tyre? Who is the king of Tyre? Figure that out, and you'll be well on your way to identifying the connection. But while we're waiting, and hopefully reading ahead, what do we do in the meantime? What do we take away from this chapter that, let's be honest, reads more like a shipping manifest than exhortation from God? I think the answer, if we're willing to let it be, if we're willing to let it steer us, pun intended, guide us, direct us, I think that there's some real self-scrutiny that this chapter can provoke in us and among us. Studying this week and reading all of this, shipwreck kind of imagery, I kept hearing the words to the Cody Carnes song, Firm Foundation, in my head. Rain came, the wind blew, I'm going to make it through, my house is built on you. Christ is my firm foundation, the rock on which I stand, and so forth. And we say, yeah, when we hear that song, when we sing that song, because, that's Matthew 7. That's the end of Matthew 7. That's also the end of Luke chapter 6. Jesus says, Therefore, whoever hears these sayings of mine and does them, I'll liken him to a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain descended, the floods came, the winds blew and beat on that house, and it did not fall, for it was founded on the rock. But notice what Jesus says. Therefore, whoever hears these sayings of mine and does them. Because there's a difference between the hearing and the doing. And we know that Jesus said that. That's familiar to us. That's almost a cliche to us. Build your house on the rock. Even if we don't know the chapter and verse address in Scripture, we recognize the reference from song after song that we sing, right? On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is shifting sand. But the question is, are we hearing those things, singing those things, or are we, as Jesus exhorts us, are we doing those things? Are we living those things? What are we building on? Because we're all building on something, and it's either Jesus or it's something else. What are we trusting in, depending on? What are we placing our faith in? Because there's a something or someone that answers that question for all of us. Christ says it should be him. Jesus says, pick me. Are we hearing that? Or are we doing that? How do I know what I'm building on? I think the question that chapter 27 puts before us, What has the ability to wreck you? What, if it were taken away, would leave you standing on the shores, figuratively speaking, wailing, crying bitterly, putting on sackcloth and ashes, mourning and grieving in all the ways that we mourn and grieve? What if taken away, would wreck you? Health? Family? How many times have you heard somebody say, my family is my rock? My spouse, my children, they're my rock. Talk to young people, a lot of times you'll hear them say things like, well, my friends are everything to me. What has the ability to wreck you? Freedom? Whether that's physical freedom or financial freedom, autonomy, reputation, influence. The things that everything I just named has in common, and other things that you could probably think of, the thing they all have in common, they can all be taken away. And like Ezekiel pictures in our text tonight, they can all be taken away in an instant. Health? Our family had a dear friend walk into the doctor hoping to get antibiotics for strep throat, walked out with a leukemia diagnosis. Family? We ended up owning a dog because a family at our old church had 3 or 4 family members die within the scope of 6 weeks, and the couple that were left, they didn't have the bandwidth to take care of a dog at that point. Freedom? What about Johnny Erickson Tata? Dove into a pool one day, hasn't walked since. I had another, not a friend, but a person that I knew, a person that I would visit in prison back in New Jersey, who was in the wrong place at the wrong time and was literally left holding the gun after a liquor store robbery, except the gun had been used by somebody else to shoot somebody else. And wrong place at the wrong time, he ends up incarcerated as accessory after the fact, did 20 years. Reputation? You know, a lie can make it around halfway around the world before the truth has its boots laced up. And wealth? Most of the wealth in the world is imaginary. I had a friend who was in the room as the highest levels of government convened in 2008. He wasn't in government, he was in the private sector, but he and some people from his firm were called in to consult during the subprime mortgage meltdown. And my friend, who's a believer and who's not given to exaggeration, will swear that the world, the global economic system, was minutes, not hours, minutes away from total meltdown. Because at the end of the day, the world financial system is held together with hope and assumption and mutually agreed upon fiction. Once it starts unraveling, it's really hard to stop it. And my friend, who was up close and personal and had access to real-time information, will look you in the eye and swear to you that God intervened that day. He compares it to how Jesus slipped through the crowds when the crowds gathered to try to kill him, to throw him over the cliff or to stone him. Why? Because his crucifixion was scheduled. It had an appointed time, and the time hadn't arrived yet. The world's economy is going to shipwreck. We read about it in Revelation 18, but the appointed date for that hasn't happened. There are things that have to happen first. 7 years of tribulation has to happen first. A time that the author of Hebrews describes as a time in which that which can be shaken will be shaken. Hebrews 12. That's the tribulation. Everything that a person can build their life on that's not Jesus, family, health, security, reputation, is going to be threatened, is going to be shaken, is going to be compromised, is going to disintegrate before people's eyes. With what goal? What's God going for? To convince the world in general, and Israel in particular, to put their trust in Jesus or die refusing to. What does that have to do with us, Patrick? We're not going to be here. Yeah, but what did Jesus say? In this life you will have tribulations, small t, but with an exclamation point at the end. The fact that we escape the tribulation, capital T, the fact that the rapture of the church comes first, doesn't mean that we get through this life unscathed. Jesus says many times, multiple times, we won't. And what's the point of the tribulations, small t, that you and I endure in this life? What is the outcome of them? How does God redeem them? He uses them to force us to examine our foundation. What am I trusting in? What am I relying upon? Is it Jesus or is it something else? And if it's something else, sooner or later it's going to crumble under my feet. If I'm relying on something other than Jesus, sooner or later it's going to go away. And when it does, it's going to wreck me. What are you building on tonight? What part of your life, if suddenly taken away, would leave you broken or empty? Like the people on the shore in chapter 27, weeping, crying, mourning, wailing, bitterness of heart, crying out, asking, how did this happen? And what do I do now? Whatever it is, don't be surprised if Jesus allows it to be taken away. If we're building our house, if we're building our lives on something not Jesus, don't be shocked if Jesus allows it to crumble. Not because he's cruel, because he's ultimately kind. And he wants us to be depending on and relying on and trusting in something that doesn't move. Someone that doesn't change. I've had that happen in my life. I've told this story before several years ago. Jesus was calling me to a deeper relationship, to a greater dependency. And so he said, you know what? Patrick finds some identity in the fact that he's got a side hustle. He relies a little bit on his ability to go out and earn outside of the church. Let's take that away. And Patrick finds some identity. He finds some bragging rights in some of the ministry that he does. Let's take that away. And by the way, in the back of his mind, Patrick always believes as long as I'm healthy, I'll be able to provide for my family. As long as I'm healthy, I'll be able to lead a church. As long as I'm healthy. So let's take that away. All three in the span of a couple months. Was not fun. And it hasn't been fun any of the times that God has done that to me because I'm a slow learner. Kind of a recursive thing. Better option? Take it from someone who's been there, and probably you've been there too. Probably you've experienced for yourself. So you know, better option is make Jesus the foundation, the entirety of the foundation now. Choose him now. So when the rain comes and the wind blows, because it's gonna, for all of us, when it batters our health, when it comes against our family, when it threatens our freedom, when it steals our job, we'll be shaken. We'll be saddened. We'll be way sober, but we won't be shipwrecked. How do I do that? Ask the question, what in your life, if it went away tonight, would wreck you? Ask yourself, who am I? God begins chapter 27 holding up a mirror to Tyre. This is how you think of yourself. This is how you see yourself. This is what you're proud of. How do we answer that question? Who am I? What defines me? What makes me me? What matters to me? Who decides what matters to me? And if Jesus isn't the answer to every one of those questions, what would it look like if he were? And then ask, how do I start letting that be the answer? Letting him be the rock. Doing, not just hearing. Building, not just talking. So that at the end of it, we'll be able to say, I've got joy in chaos. I've got peace that makes no sense. I won't be going under because I'm not held by my own strength, because I built my life on Jesus. He's never let me down. He's faithful in every season. So why would he fail now? He won't. And he's the one thing in the universe that won't. Anything else, everything else can be taken away, will be taken away. Let him be the foundation, the lodgepole, the rock, the strong tower, the shelter. He's literally begging us to tonight. Will we let him? Will we choose him? Jesus, thank you that you go to such extraordinary lengths to reveal your goodness and your grace to us. Thank you that again and again, through plain language and metaphorical language, through prophecy and through teaching, you reveal to us clearly, plainly, who you are and who you desire to be in our lives. As we seek you, as we call upon your name tonight, show us what we're building on. Our ability to kid ourselves, to deceive ourselves and tell ourselves fairy tales knows no bounds. Lord, we give you permission to cut through the clamor, the self-deceit, the confusion. Where are we getting our worth? Where are we finding our identity? What is our source of strength, real or imagined? How do we lay those things down? How do we choose you, cling to you, build on you? Speak to your people, Lord. We're listening.